So welcome to another episode of the Unfinished Cubby, a podcast about philosophy, purpose, and meaning, and about finding and maintaining balance in your life. With me today is the creator of the lecture series, Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, John Vervaeke. Thanks for joining me today, John.
Thank you, Kris. It's a pleasure to be here.
So we've switched from a very chaotic but personal thing to, and then I've gone from a formal script. Did that feel strange to you?
A little strange,
Yeah.
but it's okay. I mean, part of what's happening with me a lot these days is I'm finding myself rapidly having to switch hats.
Oh, yes.
I have an academic hat, and I have an online hat, and then I also am sort of teaching people, mindfulness practices and wisdom cultivation practices, and I'm also trying to build communities. So I'm switching between hats, and it's so that I guess chaos is becoming a little bit more familiar to me. I'm endeavoring to not get confused by it or to put on the wrong hat at the wrong time. And I'm relying on my family and friends to help keep me centered and grounded. So I'm realizing the correct role in the correct situation. It's interesting because I hope this is true. It seems to me to be true that I'm getting more empathy for a wider variety of people because of this.
Cool. And this is relatively new, and is it largely in relation to the release of Awakening series? That
yeah. So I mean, I was used to the academic hat and the teacher hat, but when I released Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, and then all the series afterwards, the Voices with Vervaeke and Untangling the World Knot and The Elusive I, and Towards a Metapsychology, all these series, but especially Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, was tremendous, tremendous sense of exposure, and which was quite almost terrifying initially for me. There was a sense of, because I'm sort of socially phobic by disposition, which is why I went into teaching, of course. And so that really has put me very much into kind of a sink or swim situation that I did not foresee. I had incorrectly thought that releasing the lecture series would be pretty equivalent to giving a lecture series at a university. And of course, while there are important similarities, there were unforeseen important differences that I'm learning to adapt to.
And is that in the following fame, or more than just that?
It's that for sure, but it's also bringing more mindful awareness to the differences that are afforded by the different media and the different kind of people that I'm interacting with. So I'm interacting with people that are neither my colleagues, academic colleagues, or nor my students. They often have an intimate knowledge of me that I do not have of them when I meet them, right?
For sure. Yeah. I thought about that a lot, actually, because and I said I sort of made some notes and things, and I was just like, but that's bizarre for me to go and sort of start discussing with you. Like, it feels like we've been having a conversation to me, and obviously you're just meeting me for the very first time right now. Yeah.
So those are a lot of differences for me. Typically, my students and I meet each other at the same time, or I meet my colleagues and we start working together and we have a history together. And so, and you can imagine, and it's never been anything other than good faith, good intention when I meet people. But you can imagine my sense of, again, exposure, because people seem to have this sense of intimate connection to me, and I'm just meeting them for the first time. So I've had to adapt to that as well. What has helped is how kind and respectful and encouraging all my interlocutors have been, and for which I'm deeply appreciative.
Awesome. Hey, John, I wanted to start with asking you a little bit about your life, your background. What sort of brought you to, let's say, to teaching first of all?
Well, what brought me to teaching is in grade 3. They used to let me teach some of the classes, and I got labeled the mini teacher. So teaching is something that I've been called to for a very long time in my life. So um, I've always wanted to teach. It wasn't clear to me what that teaching would be. And like I said, part of that in my personal history was trying to figure out how somebody was by nature quite shy and withdrawn as an introverted child um, was going to be a teacher. And so working that out was one sort of aspirational task that I've been journeying on. But then why I ended up teaching what I'm teaching, that's a different story. And I don't know if you want to get into that story as well.
I think I'd love to, but I do want to ask you first what you taught when you were in grade 3.
Um, well, at grade 3, you don't have sort of defined subjects, at least in Canada. It's more this sort of homogenous blob of things you should know. And which was looking back, I had I mean, she might even be dead now. Her name was Ms. Bartman, and she was one of those teachers that all you can say is just I'm lucky to have met her. The fact that I remember her name tells you the impact that she made on me. And I actually had her for both grade 3 and grade 5, which is extremely fortunate for me. And so I remember her asking me, we'd read a story and for me to teach about the story, or things like that. I remember one report card I read by her. She said, "John will often tell me when I'm using psychology with his fellow students in the class." I have memories of sort of talking to her about, some of what she taught. Her father was an artist, and like many young children, but I guess especially because of my nascent scientific interest, I was fascinated by dinosaurs, and he drew sort of a picture of dinosaurs for me, and a sort of history of evolution of life on Earth. It had a huge impact on me.
Cool. May I ask there, just you mentioned the psychology, what work did your folks do? What was your early introduction to psychology there?
It did not come
Questions.
from. Yeah. It did not come from my family. Maybe in a bit from my mom. My mom would read some books a little bit about psychology from the sort of self-help angle. My dad, not much. My dad was the best thing you could call him is sort of a handyman. And my mom was what used to be called a housewife or homemaker, stay-home mom. She would work periodically, part-time. We were quite poor. And I was brought up both within my nuclear family and in my extended family with a very rigid kind of fundamentalist Christianity
Yes.
that really sort of, I'm grateful to it because like we have a mother tongue, we have a mother religion that gives us a taste for the transcendent. And I'm grateful for that. And I'm grateful for being exposed to, some sacred literature and the project of meaning and connectedness and sacredness and wisdom. But I also, and this, I only understood this in retrospect, I also came to see how much I was traumatized, often terrified by this framework. And so there was a long struggle for me to get free from it. And then as that unfolded, to try and properly address the taste for self-transcendence, the taste for meaning and wisdom, the taste for depth that my upbringing had left in me, and to see if there was a way of doing that that was viably integratable with my calling to teaching and to science, which was also clear in me from very early age. So trying to get all of that together has been my personal project, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And then the thing about me that is also lucky, and it didn't have to turn out this way, I found that as I worked that through, and as I worked that through both personally, existentially on one side and academically on the other side, some of the problems I was considering and some of the integrated answers I was trying to bring to bear on it, I started to share that a bit with my students in other courses. And I noticed that that was the stuff they were really getting keenly interested in. And so more and more, I started to expand that. And then I was, one of my colleagues, Evan Thompson, who I know quite well, I consider him a friend. He was formerly a colleague at U of T, and he went to the UBC. He was supposed to teach a course on Buddhism and cognitive science, and he couldn't do it because of scheduling. And they asked him, well, who else could possibly teach this course? And he said, well, John Vervaeke could teach it. So I took up that course, and I was initially going to do, well, here's what some cognitive scientists are saying about Buddhism. Here's what some Buddhists, the typical kind of academic thing. And then I realized, but John, you've been attracted to Buddhism and cognitive science, and particularly you're attracted to how they're attracted together. And why is that? And then had to do about these things I was wrestling with, about how to integrate spirituality in a scientific worldview. And I realized, well, maybe they're coming together. Maybe this isn't just a problem idiosyncratic to me. Maybe many people are and I started to develop that course. And as I developed that course, and I developed related courses on altered states of consciousness and mindfulness meditation and the psychology of wisdom, I just took all of that and integrated it into Awakening from the Meaning Crisis.
Cool. Were you already doing Vipassana, practicing Vipassana at that stage? You mentioned that quite a lot.
Oh yes,
Yeah,
I've been doing that.
So,
I've been doing Vipassana, Metta, Tai Chi Chuan, and related Qigong and things like that for 30 years.
And what brought you to those things early on?
Well, what was interesting is, so I was in high school, where of course this frequently happens to people, when that particular meaning crisis that I talked about earlier hit me, right? And it was actually a science fiction book by Roger Zelazny that sort of opened up my mind and made me realize.
What's the book?
I have a really excellent discussion with Damian Walters about how science fiction sort of takes the role of mythology in our culture. And Roger Zelazny's one of the core things he was trying to do in his form of science fiction was to try and sort of weave together mythology and science. And so this book opened me up to that possibility, and Buddhism and Hinduism, and it was like, and then I read Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. So I was going like this, right, in high school. That's what led me out. But then I was hungry, like I said. I like, okay, yes, so no to that, but I don't want to say no to meaning and connected. I didn't have that language now. This is retrospectively, right? And then what happened is I went into university and I took an introduction to philosophy course, and I met Socrates in The Republic by Plato. And it was that is what I want and what I'm looking for. But the thing is, even though the name philosophy means the love of wisdom, the topic of wisdom falls off the table after first year university. After that course, there was no courses on wisdom. There was no course on the philosophical traditions like Stoicism and Epicureanism and Neoplatonism, in which the cultivation of wisdom was central. You basically do some Plato, some Aristotle, and then you leap to Descartes, right? And it's like, whoa. And so I continued on in the philosophy because I found the skills that it was giving me, like, and the meta-scientific reflection, the meta-cultural reflection, all of that was valuable. But the hunger for that transformative process by which we aspire to wisdom and cultivate virtue was not being met. And so down the street from me, literally, was a place, the Tai Chi and Meditation Center, where they taught an ecology of practices, Vipassana, Metta, some related Qigong, and Tai Chi Chuan. And I went there, and so as I started doing those things, I started realizing, oh, this is what I want. And I dove into those practices deeply, you might even say religiously. But then what started to happen is I discovered, after I finished my MA in philosophy, I discovered this new discipline, cognitive science, that was talking about things more like the way Plato talked about them. Because in Plato, there's no clear distinction between philosophy and psychology and transformation, right? They're all woven together in this magnificent tapestry. And so I started to do cognitive science. And as I was doing cognitive science was going through this transformation in which topics like, and Evan Thompson was one of the people doing this, topics like mindfulness and self-transcendence and wisdom were now becoming bona fide academic topics. So I started teaching about these things academically and studying them scientifically. So it was just, for me, everything came together like this. And then, right, I'm very grateful for that. I did not engineer this, right? I am exceedingly lucky, fortuitous that things unfolded that way for me.
I had this sounds like a leap, but it comes back. I had a psychotic episode in my early 20s, and the experience of unfiltered stimulus and constant connections was really profound. And the early parts, especially of your talks, in the way of the constant connections, you sound like a crazy person there. It's like this. Except the difference, of course, is it's coherent. But yeah, no, it's absolutely incredible, I think, and I certainly recommend Awakening from the Meaning Crisis to anyone, and especially the early lectures. The way that you just pull together so many threads and just make this very coherent picture of all of these diverse things. And I also feel like you talk about flow a lot, interconnectedness, and I also the lectures, you're demonstrating the topic as you're doing it. As you're talking about flow, it's an incredible example of flow.
Yes, thank you. That's very much the case. I very often get into the flow state when I'm lecturing, and the reverse is the case. Lecturing, the best lecturing is to share teaching and transformation with your students rather than you're thinking of giving them information. So very much when I am lecturing about this stuff, it's reactivating the transformational processes that I myself have gone through or I'm going through. So I often get insight. So I often get insights that reverberate back. And so this loop is created, which is facilitated and empowered the degree to which I can get into the flow state.
I'm up to, I think, number 35 at the moment. So yeah, and look, I mean, that says a lot. That's 35 hours of my time in recent months. I'm like, all right, I'm going for a big drive now. I get to do another meaning crisis thing. So, and yeah, it's very much in the thick of at the moment where I'm up to that. The word you use is participatory, and I think basically the core of a lot of it at the moment is just that life is not subject object, but a constant interplay. I thought, because I get to talk to you, that I might cheat and see if I could skip to the end and ask if you provide an answer for finding meaning, and if that's something that we could talk about today. It's certainly, for me personally, something of huge. I'm sure, many people hunger for meaning, for some kind of answer. And I realize those are two different things, but yeah, what answer do you have to that?
Well, I don't have like the answer, if the answer means what is the meaning of life, because I don't think such sort of a metaphysical entity exists, or I'm very suspicious of that. Instead, and I'm not the only person studying this, increasingly we can talk about meaning in life. Susan Wolf brought that out in her book named Meaning in Life and Why It Matters. And then you have psychologists studying it. And so the answer is more like this. You're in like episode 35, and I'm talking a lot about this process of relevance realization and how we're constantly sort of evolving in it, not biologically, but cognitively, our fittedness to our environment. We're creating that salience landscape, and we're shaping it, and it's shaping us, and all of that. And so you've got this dynamic looping, this dynamic connectedness. In the kind of cognitive science I do, it's often referred to as like coupling. And this harkens back to like biblical metaphors of a kind of knowing that's like, sexual intercourse, right? When you're making love with somebody, you're not just doing things to them and they're not just doing things to you, right? And you're not just sort of exchanging. There's this reciprocal mutual opening, and right. And so that is the fundamental way, I would argue, in which we are intelligent cognitive agents, that self-organizing, dynamical looping process between the dynamics of the brain's self-organization and the dynamics of the world's self-organization. And that's very much analogous to the way living things are constantly shaping themselves to the environment and constantly shaping the environment to them. So there's a deep continuity, to use Evan Thompson's idea, between being alive and being cognitive. So all of that, I have a lot of argument for that. I'm just summarizing it. So
yes.
I hope people don't think John's just saying crap. No, I mean, right? That's not happening. But the point is, and here's the central idea, and it came up on earlier things in the Buddhism, right? The Buddhism episodes and the mindfulness episodes, the very processes that make us adaptive, this constantly evolving adapted fittedness, they make us prone to self-deceptive, self-destructive behavior. And that self-deceptive, self-destructive behavior, of course, is in itself intrinsically bad for us. It's self-deceptive, self-destructive. It's pernicious. And it's pernicious in a particular way. Think about how, let's use the metaphor of being in a romantic relationship with somebody, someone you couple with, and if you start getting into all kinds of self-deceptive, self-destructive patterns, you're going to uncouple from them reliably. That's what therapy is all about. You're going to uncouple from them. And so it's not just that it's self-deceptive, self-destructive abstractly. This foolishness that we're prone to, it cuts off all the ways in which we seek out a fundamental connectedness to other people. But we're also always, for very similar reasons, seeking out a fundamental connectedness to ourselves and to the world. Those three forms of connectedness are all interdependent and I couldn't properly connect to you if I'm fundamentally disconnected from myself. And I also can't connect to you and myself if I'm not properly connected to the world, and they all interpenetrate. So what happens is all of this triangle of connectedness, if I can put it that way, gets undermined by foolishness. Now, it turns out there's good argument and evidence that sense of connectedness is exactly what we need when we use the metaphor of meaning in life. Our lives are meaningful to the degree to which we have an evolving connectedness to ourselves, to each other, and the world, in a way in which those three are mutually affording and mutually supporting each other. But foolishness corrodes that and undermines it. We get into ways in which we start turning fundamentally and perniciously lose touch with ourselves and or others and or the world. And this is how people come to lose meaning. It's not about having a particular set of beliefs. I can't give you a proposition that will, and you'll go, right, that's it, right? I think anybody who offers you that, you should suspect them, either they're deeply self-deceived or they're trying to get something from you. So the reason for that is the following: this connectedness, this evolving dynamic connectedness that is lost in foolishness, right? It's not primarily generated by the level of our propositional thinking. That's not what's primarily. Our propositional thinking depends on much deeper processes that get all this connectedness going. I use a word for this, and I use this word deliberately. I use the word religio, which means connectedness, but it's also one of the potential etymological origins of the word religion. When we find things sacred, whether or not we're secular or religious, when we find things sacred, the birth of my child was a sacred event. Why? Because you feel fundamentally connected. You feel like you are connected to some somebody or something that is beyond your egocentric concerns. You matter to something other than yourself, right? And so the word that has been used across cultures for addressing that self-deceptive, self-destructive behavior that's very complex and going on largely beneath our propositional thinking, and affording, enhancing that non-propositional cognition that makes us feel connected, the word for that is wisdom. So now I can give you what the meaning crisis is in a sentence. It is a wisdom famine. So the answer isn't a proposition. The answer is how can we use the best cognitive science to come up with the best ecology of practices for helping people recover in a viable manner and a shareable manner the cultivation of wisdom. That's what the series ends with. But the series is not complete, because that's why I'm doing other things. That's why I'm doing all this work to try and give people practices. I taught all during COVID. I taught online meditation and contemplation course. Then I followed that up with a cultivation of wisdom course. I've been doing a whole bunch of projects and doing workshops on how we can practice dialectic into dialogos, how we can use not just individual cognition, but networked, distributed cognition to turn our intelligence, not our individual intelligence, but our collective intelligence into wisdom cultivation. There isn't a single answer. There isn't a single practice, because there are many practices from many traditions and many emerging practices, and they can be configured in many different ways, all of which can, in terms of cognitive science, be vetted as legitimate and reliable and pursuable.
Cool. That was a good answer. Thank you. Thank you. There's a couple of things I want to just pick out a little bit. Terms like self-delusion, self-deception, foolishness. There's a suggestion that there's a correct way of being and acting, and then I think what you're saying, that is the cultivation of wisdom, is the and what makes that inherently correct is just the fact that there is the greater sense of connection and therefore greater sense of well-being.
Yes. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about it first in cognitive terms, making use of the work of Merleau-Ponty. He's a philosopher who has a huge impact on the kind of cognitive science I do. 4E cognitive science: embodied, embedded, inactive, and extended. Basically, the main slogan of this is cognition isn't in your head. It's between your embodied brain and the world in that loop, right? That's the main difference. So when we say a better way, and this is part of, this actually feeds into trying to reconceptualize what the sacred means, right? What's the best way for me to grip this object? Well, this is what you should say. It depends on what you're going to do with it, right? It depends on what you're going to do with it. So Merleau-Ponty had this point about what we're constantly doing is we're trying to get what he called an optimal grip. He doesn't always mean physically gripping. So let's do it visual. Like, should I be really close and get the details? Should I be very far and get the gestalt? Should I hold it still to emphasize its structure, or should I move it to get a key understanding of its dynamics? And what you should say to me, it depends on, and here's what I was talking about, depends on what's relevant to you, right? What's the relevant? This is why I call this whole process relevance realization. So your optimal grip is constantly going to evolve, just like an organism's adaptive nature, its adaptive fittedness to its environment is going to constantly evolve across time. It's why, animals evolve, organisms evolve, right? In the same way, obviously much more rapidly, you are constantly by constantly moving and adjusting your sensory motor loop, you're constantly adjusting your grip on anything in order to best fit to what is relevant in that situation. And when you are doing that more and more comprehensively in your life, you like your life. You fall in love with the world. you get something like what happens when you're making love as opposed to just having sex with somebody. You know, when you're making love to somebody, they start, right? You start to open up to them, which affords them opening up to you. And you get this reciprocal opening as you afford each other getting a more and more optimal grip, no pun intended, an optimal grip on each other, right? And that's part of love. And we don't try to justify that. We don't say, and why should we be in love with things? What's the reason for that? We go, no, we're in love with things because that's intrinsically good. Part of what I'm saying is it's intrinsically good because it's constitutive of us getting like it's part of our sense that we're on it, we have an optimal grip on the world. We're connected. The world is flowing, and like we're flowing into the world, and the world is flowing into us, right? And so we want this, and we want it for its own sake, and we should. It's completely understandable why we should.
The thing it most brings to mind in me, the thing it most connects with in my mind is like religious or spiritual concepts. It sounds similar to, you know, if you're diverging from, like sin is when you're not
Oh yeah, missing the mark.
Yeah, and that's right. And or then like you know, the Tao is when you're completely in the flow, and you know, so yeah.
Well, can I play with both of those for a minute?
Please, yeah.
Well, think about, I think it's hamartia, when you're missing the mark. I did some archery because I wanted to understand this, right? I wanted to understand it perspectively and participatory, not just propositionally, right? Nice. And you can't understand skills, right, unless you do them, right? And so I did. And the thing about archery is if you aim where you're thinking is the target, you'll actually miss the target because of the way your vision is skewed, right? So the wrong thing is salient to you. And what you have to do is you have to get an intervening skill that says, no, shoot right this far away. And then you have to learn how to, you know, calibrate that displacement, given how far away you are and the strength of the bow and all of this stuff, until that's why it's hard. If you could just shoot where you see, everybody would be great. Right? So we miss the mark. And this is actually an excellent metaphor for self-deceptive, self-destructive behavior, sin. Because what happens when we're self-deceived and self-deceptive? We don't lie to each other. That's a bad metaphor. You can't lie to yourself. But what you can do is you can miss the mark. You can make the processes that are trying to realize what's relevant to you are foregrounding some things, backgrounding others, making some things salient rather than others, right? And the thing about that is you can disconnect your salience tracking from your tracking of reality. This was made very famous and I'm not trying to be vulgar here, but Harry Frankfurt wrote a book called On Bullshit. And bullshitting is different from lying. The liar is depending on manipulating you by trying to get you to believe that something is true. The bullshit artist is trying to get you to disconnect what you find salient from your understanding of what's real or true. And advertising is a clear example of that. Advertising makes things salient in a way that is disconnected from whether or not the claims are particularly true, right? Or that you particularly understand what's going on. Do you honestly believe that wearing this shampoo, using this shampoo will transform your life and people will relate to you differently? Like right? But the shampoo commercial makes salient, right, the beauty of this person and this wonderful background, this sweeping music. And so we buy the product because the salience has been disconnected from the reality. That's bullshitting. And we do this with our attention all the time. We can find the wrong thing salient and we can forget to check. So the person shooting at the bullseye, right, this area in its visual field is salient to them. But if they don't correct for that, they will miss the mark and they will think they are shooting at their target and they will miss the mark. We are doing that all the time. And so, and I don't mean to invoke Christianity here. I don't mean to deny it either. I have a respectful relationship with Christianity, I hope. But we're doing that all the time. We're sinning all the time in that sense. The Tao is the same thing, like you said. So when you're doing Tai Chi Chuan and right, you have to do like push hands, you have to do a lot of other things. You have to learn, right? That right. You know what weapons focus is? Like when people are held up by somebody that has a gun and the police come and they ask for a description, they can't describe the person, but they can give you a really accurate description of the gun, which is largely useless because the gun is super salient and they hyper focus on it. It's the same thing when like you're supposed to when you're sparring, you can't just have a like remember with the pencil. I can't just have a wide open view and I can't just have a focus view. I have to constantly do this, constantly flow it, or else I'll miss the mark. It's one of the things you can do with people, right? And it's legitimate because, you know, barring ethical constraints, you know, sparring is pretty open, right? When somebody does something, compliment them. Say, that was a really great block. How did you do that? And then they'll be like, and then they'll hyper focus on the block.
Right.
And they'll lose the optimal grit and they'll start to choke, right? And things like that. So both, I'm not saying that Christianity and Taoism are equal or anything like that, but they're both in different ways converging on this idea about how we deceive ourselves. Now, that's not because we're evil. We have to do that. We have to focus our attention. Notice right now what's happening with your attention, I hope. And there's nothing wrong with it. Part of you is doing this. And think about how this is like evolution. Part of you is selecting and trying to focus your attention on me. But part of you is opening up in variation. What else is, where's this going? What's John saying? And what should I say? And what should I do? And you're doing this, right? You're doing this.
I am.
Right. And that makes you adaptive. But think about think about how that process of constantly manipulating your salience also makes you constantly prone to missing the mark, to losing the Tao. The very processes that make you so adaptively intelligent are the very same processes that make you perennially prone to self-deceptive, self-destructive behavior. And that behavior undermines the connectedness that makes your life worth living. People will take significant damages to their standard of living and their subjective sense of well-being. Good evidence for this, if they believe it's meaningful, if they have that sense of connectedness, of mattering. But you can fill them with affluence, and if they lose that sense of mattering, of connectedness, of being in touch with what's real, they will fall into despair or endless distraction from despair.
Can we play with this some more?
Yeah, and I love serious play. I think we should always engage in serious play.
Cool. And I have a strong personal interest in my own. There's some bits and pieces of sticking points for this, and it's funny. I kind of go into. I go into it and I've got it. It's like, all right, and then back out of and a part of a sticking point is the notion that there's some kind of right to this, and that's tied in for me. I also have a strong Lutheran background.
Yes.
Yeah. My mother's father was a missionary, actually, and I've actually done some mission work myself in Liberia. Post when I was actually Christian, but still connected to the church and able to do that. But I recently, like in the last year, I've been doing bits and pieces of been doing some therapy, seeing counselor, and things that I've always known about. You spoke about the trauma from religious doctrine, and I've kind of spoken about, I've kind of had an awareness of, that's not a great thing. And I'll give an example in a moment so it's clear what I'm talking about. But in actually doing some counseling, then it's apparent actually how impactful that is, how interwoven that is, and how damaging. And probably a really good example is, and I think you talk about it in Awakening from the Meaning Crisis as well, although possibly not. But you were born in sin.
sorry for interrupting, Kris.
Yes.
Kris, sorry for interrupting. I've lost signal. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah. Are you hearing me okay? Are you hearing me?
You've been frozen. You've been frozen and choppy. So I lost a little bit in there.
Okay, interesting.
Everything seems okay now.
Yeah, you're coming through perfectly fine. I've no idea. Presumably,
I still got good signal strength. I've still got good signal strength. So, I mean, it could be anywhere in a bunch of intervening variables.
All right.
So sorry for interrupting, but I didn't want to lose the thread.
That's all right. No, thank you. I think I was going on a bit of a tangent anyway, but I wanted to say, like, one of the very, I use the word, fundamental teachings in Lutheranism and a lot of Christianity is that you are born in sin. As a human, you are inherently sinful and wrong, and there is no redemption for you. It is only through God. And that's obviously like an incredibly disempowering thing to embrace. You know, removes any sense of agency or also of worth. It's also saying you're wrong. And I recognize even, and I also have a loving respect for Christianity as well. I sort of, I don't mean to disparage purely, but you know, what I'm saying is still true. Where do I want to go with this? Those ideas, I think of right and wrong as well, right? That's a very big part of the mythos. So deep. There is God who is good, and there is the devil and temptation that is wrong, which is what we're talking about as well, right? But I question, and you know, with other teachings and ideas, like, because even without, like, that stuff gets embedded, right? When it's given to you over and over, and as a child, it's in there deep, and you can't just think differently when you're older. So that notion, that concept of right and wrong, and the fear of, am I going to get this wrong? Am I, like, that's so deep within me, and it's difficult for me to know what truth there is in that idea and how much of it is a pure narrative that's actually not helpful for, or not, let's say, not reflective of a deeper reality, perhaps, as well. I'm going to stop talking there because I'm going, and let you respond to anything you choose to.
Well, I think that's very important. I think, and I talk about Luther in this series, and I should have talked also more about Calvin. Calvinism and Cartesianism both are addressing in different ways that kind of fundamental anxiety about getting it wrong. And they both offer claims, different sources of the claim, but they're both claiming a kind of certainty, the certainty of an unquestionable faith, or the certainty of unquestionable argumentation. And if what you're asking from me is there a way of obtaining this certainty? I would say that's actually a very poorly posed question, because it's like, for me, asking what's north of the North Pole. I think the issues that are creating the anxiety are not going to be alleviated by the pursuit of certainty, precisely because what the history of science, and I would also argue the last 4 centuries of religion have shown us, is that such pursuit of certainty has not produced it, and often inflicted an increase in suffering all around. So both forms of fundamentalism within religion and scientism. I'm a scientist. I love and believe in science. I don't believe in a kind of, you know, science gives us the way things are right now. Absolutely. It's like, you haven't studied the history of science. You just haven't paid it. Science is a process, one of the best processes we have for constantly self-correcting and self-transcending our knowledge claims. And I would argue that the best religion is a self-correcting process for constantly improving our cultivation of wisdom. And then what I would say to you is, what are the best processes in terms of an optimal grip on the world, right, for truth and knowledge, and an optimal grip on your optimal grip for wisdom and virtue? What is, and this is a kind of philosophical pragmatism, what are the best, most reliable processes within you and between you and other people, and you observe in other people, for giving you, in a coupled fashion, the ongoing self-correction of your knowledge claims and the ongoing self-correction of your cultivation of wisdom, your overcoming of ignorance and your overcoming of foolishness. Don't tell me what you believe. Tell me what you practice and why you have good reason and evidence to believe that those practices are reducing your ignorance and reducing your foolishness. Keep moving away from ignorance and foolishness. Stop trying to say, I need to see the perfect destination and know that it's there for certain, or I shouldn't move. That's, I would say, is false. If you are reliably getting less ignorant and less foolish, your life is going to be filled with more truth and more meaning, not only your life, but the way it touches other people's lives. And what else needs less justification than that?
That's also a very good answer. I think if I can poke at this one more time just to see.
Please, we should, right? I don't want to. I hope I'm not doing this. I don't want to ever bully anybody into. I want people to constantly probe.
Yeah,
right, good.
No, there's in me that there's a real struggle around this, because what I'm hearing, so first of all, you make, how could you possibly argue against the pursuit of wisdom and therefore happiness in one's life, to summarize what you just said? But there's something in me that just rebels against the notion of there's a right, there's a getting it right, and I rebel against it for the reason that I gave of that's so so I don't know, what do you say to that that you're getting it right or wrong?
Like I said, I'm trying to, when normative terms are used, like right and wrong, as opposed to descriptive terms, you should ask, what is the normative theory behind this? And I'm proposing to you that the normative theory behind this is, right, a kind of certainty, that what we're after is an absolute kind of security. And that's based on a deeper presupposition that what's ultimately real is that which grounds certainty. And this is a notion of sort of perfection, that the sacred is that which is perfect. And somebody whose work I love and I am devoted to, Plato, but that's one thing I criticize Plato for sort of giving us that notion. Although the more recent scholarship suggests that maybe that's an incorrect reading of Plato, which I'm happy about, by the way. So, maybe you rebel against the idea of there being a right because of a right way, although I suspect that you still want your knowledge to be true, your experiences to be beautiful, and your actions to be good. And so you're trying to figure out I'm suggesting to you, I could be wrong, I'm suggesting to you, you're trying to figure out, how can I pursue what's true, good, and beautiful without losing a living relationship to them, without being bound to some external authority telling me what they finally and absolutely are?
I think this is what
Maybe I'm wrong.
No, this is what I'm thinking now. I think there's two very different discussions that are conflated in my mind.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So one is about finding meaning, and very much all right, how do I interact in the world? What is this? And the kind of things that you speak about very much. There's a separate, I think, philosophical question about, what is this place? Why are we here? What's the meaning of life in it? Or not, that's not the right terms to use, but I guess kind of understanding. Okay, so what I have in my mind, I have the notion that there's a fundamental reality separate to the pursuit of happiness in our individual lives. What do you think of
Why would you
that?
think that? Why would
Why
you
do I
think that?
think that?
Yeah. Why would you
Um,
think that your cognition is so malformed that as it tries to optimally function, it would disconnect you from
no,
reality?
no, no, no. That's not what I mean. What I mean is that, okay, that's interesting, an interesting answer. But I guess yeah, I do have the idea that the understanding of what this world is separate to my personal life meaning. I definitely feel that. What do you say to that?
I'd say to you that that is very much a post-Reformation knowledge claim. It's
Sure.
exactly opposite to the Socratic claim that knowledge is virtue, right? And virtue means eudaimonia, it means meaning, it means happiness in the meaningful sense, not the emotional sense, right? Because the Greeks would say, well, you're trying to get closer to reality, and you're doing that because you value that for its own sake. Like, and this is true. People not only want the fulfillment of their desires, they want what fulfills their desires to be real. I use this example all the time, and I do this with my students. I'll say, how many of you are in really satisfying romantic relationships? And romantic relationships are supposed to be, in our culture, the epitome of meaning. And then I'll say, how many of you would want to know if your partner was cheating on you and that would destroy the relationship? 95% of them put up their hands. And I say, why are you doing this? Why are you destroying your happiness? And they say, because it's not real. So notice how happiness and real are not oppositional. This is the Greek point. Getting at what's real is fundamental to our happiness. It's fundamental. It's one of our meta drives. And making, like, the goodness of things is not separable from their intelligibility. Being connected to things in that way that, you know, I'm gaining in my self-knowledge, and the world is disclosing itself. Plato talks about this in Anagoge. Those are inseparably bound up together in the Socratic Platonic framework. So thinking that, well, the pursuit of one could take me far away from the other, isn't that, and I'm trying to say this in a very friendly, affectionate manner to you,
I won't be
isn't
offended.
that isn't that just another version of you're born depraved, you're born twisted, and your pursuit of your desires is going to essentially cause you to fall?
It certainly feels like it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think,
Yeah.
that's it. That seems to fit. So I'm interested in, say, asking you something that I would consider like purely philosophical, like, why do you think that there is, that humans and the world exist as opposed to nothing? How would you answer a question like that?
I think that that question is malformed, and I'm not trying to be insulting. Let me explain what I mean. If I ask why of something, I'm saying that it exists for something other than itself. Why the knife? So I can cut things. Why the car? So I can travel. If I ask why ultimate reality, it's like, what? That makes no sense. You're asking, your very question is self-destructive, because you're saying ultimate reality is for something beyond itself, but then it wouldn't be ultimate reality. That makes no sense, right? What's ultimately real, and Eckhart says this, right? And so many people converge on this in the mystical tradition. The ultimate real has no why, because if it had a why, it wouldn't be the ultimate real.
Okay. Excellent answer again as well. And I'm really appreciating this, John. I'm getting a lot from this. I'm being transformed. What about where? Can I ask where? Like, or how? Like, yeah, like, can I ask a question?
That I think that's a very good question. And so that's a question that I'm pursuing. And it's a question that you can't pursue just intellectually. The deepest truths are truths that are only disclosed to us as we undergo transformation and self-transcendence. So it's not something I can just pursue intellectually. I have to pursue it in conjunction with an ecology of practices that are supposed to bring me into a process of transformation that is lined with sort of the disclosure of a system of truths, if I can put it that way. And so, and I'm doing this not only singularly, I'm doing this in dialogue with a lot of people from different perspectives and framework. I'm trying to do this as Socratically as I possibly can. And I am becoming convinced that the answer of how is very much an answer that looks something like this, right? That we have to see reality as something like a process. Process isn't the right word because processes and unfold in time. So I'm using it like a metaphor, right? But we have to see that, and notice that this is language already coming into prevalence within science. We have to see how things are emergent. And we talk about this. We talk about how water emerges out of the hydrogen and oxygen, and how life emerges out of inorganic matter, and how species emerge from previous. It's emergent up. Things are getting actualized in emergence. But possibility, and this is where the Eastern influence on me helped me see this in the Neoplatonic and Christian traditions, and even in the Sufi tradition, to the degree to which I understand it, and a little bit in the Jewish tradition because of my friend Zevi Slavin, who's helping me understand this. But possibility is real, is just as real. So while we think about how things cause one another, we have to think about how there's also a shaping to possibility. The possibility is also shaped into potentiality. It is constrained. And those structures of potentiality are just as real as the causal patterns. So while there's causal emergence up, there is also eminent constraint downward. And that is very much paralleled in the fundamental structure of our cognition. In psychology, cognitive science, we talk about bottom-up processing and top-down processing. There's this, right? And it's not like this, like poles, because that's sort of a mythologization. The emanation and the emergence completely interpenetrate each other at every level, just like they do in your cognition. So the relationship between them, and this is what Erigena saw and Nicholas of Cusa saw, the relationship, and this goes back to the Neoplatonic tradition directly, explicitly, right? What they all saw was that dialectic within our cognition, and the dialectic within reality, and the dialectic that's possible between you and I in dialogue, like what's happening right now. They are all just three different aspects of the same underlying fundamental reality. And so for me, that's my best answer of how is it and how could we know that it is that way? And those answers are inseparably bound up with each other.
Awesome. So there's a whole bunch of little bits and pieces of things that are like, as you talk, this, I want to ask you about this and this and this. We've been speaking for an hour. How long do you have?
I don't mean to be rude. Let me just check my phone.
Yes.
So I can keep going, but now we have to keep going on sort of an ad hoc basis. If I get a particular text, I might have to say, we need to draw it to a close, but I'm happy to keep discussing until that text arrives or until 6:30 arrives. Either, well, another 25 minutes for me. I forget what is on. So those are the two ways in which our discussion could.
Fantastic, and thank you for making that clear, and I'm happy we can end immediately when that occurs. Yeah, so hey, that was a great answer again. I really like that. I got to have a conversation with Bernardo Kastrup.
I've had two with Bernardo.
Oh yeah.
And you disagree in certain ways, although I presented that ontology to him, but we also connect profoundly in a lot of ways. We really found, and I know this is mutual because he shared this with me, we really found a deep affinity to each other. And I'm hoping that I'll be able to travel to Europe and spend some time with him in person, or he comes to North America and we can spend some time in person. Yeah, I would love to talk with him again. And so he's incredibly sharp. And I mean this as a compliment. I mean this as a compliment born out of fellowship and friendship. I needed to play my A game with Bernardo.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that, well, normally I don't in some sort of arrogant fashion. I meant I had to, like, when you're sparring with somebody and you realize, hey, and then what's beautiful about this, right? If you can shift from the aesthetics of winning to the aesthetics of the dance, and you go, this is beautiful. Well, regardless,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
And that's what happened with him. And that's a special kind of person. I just got the text I'm saying.
Oh, shoot. No.
No, we don't have to go yet. We don't have to go
Okay.
yet.
All right. Cool. Oh wow, wonderful. So look, how long have we got here?
I'm just finding out right now. Again, I
Okay.
don't want to be rude.
No, go for it.
So I interrupted you, but because I just wanted to make clear my attitude towards Bernardo. I have utmost respect for him.
So yeah, awesome. And your answer just now to the how of the universe made me want to ask that, because that seemed, I mean, it's very tricky to talk about these things, but it certainly brought to mind philosophical idealism for me in your description of John Vervaeke.
Yeah, and that's fair enough. And so I propose. So when I originally started to talk to Bernardo, I sort of took the stance initially. It's like a martial arts stance, right? I took the stance initially of just sort of presenting the framework of scientific realism, and he had some very powerful answers that I don't necessarily agree with. I think I had powerful counter answers, but I came to, oh wow, this is an intellectually respectable position. And then I offered the ontology I just gave to you, which has a lot going for it, the Neoplatonic tradition and the mystical tradition, as a way of sort of entering into dialogos rather than just debate, of saying, well, I'm going to move towards you in this way. And he didn't completely agree with this. He still, and I think properly so, I think we are in agreement that what I just get, that dialectical ontology is not the same as philosophical idealism, but he reciprocated by moving towards and saying, I can see the value in this, and so I would say that they're not the same. I think there are deep differences and important differences between them, but I think they also are close enough. Actually, they're both close enough and far enough each other that they can get into kind of an optimal grip with each other, which is helpful to both positions. Because when we move to these ultimates, like, we've got to remember Socratic humility. We have to remember that we're probably more ignorant than we have knowledge, and we should. And you see this in the Platonic dialogues. We should, authentically, propose our position and defend it as best we can. But we shouldn't try to destroy other positions that respectfully enter into a relationship with our own, precisely because it's much more likely that we'll progress towards the truth between us than trying to have one position destroy the other. And so I wouldn't say it's philosophical idealism. I think it is still a form. Neoplatonism, and especially the Neoplatonic version, is very much a form of realism. It's based on the idea that there are real patterns in the world, and the world's patterns unfold of their own accord in a way to which we are responsible. And I would argue that we depend on that for our sense of realness and truth. That's where Bernardo would, of course, disagree with me. And that's one of the fundamental differences is between realism and idealism, is their claims, which are both on both sides, are very hard to articulate. What is it we are doing when we claim to sense realness? And so that, of course, is a fraught question, and it should be. I'm not complaining. Like, if these questions were easy and we could just sort of do them in a disinterested fashion, we would have resolved them. And perhaps we can't ever resolve them precisely because we're actual human beings. We're not gods, right?
Cool. So there's something else that I kind of wanted to comment on with that. I was walking with my friend Simon Zippel, and we talk about these things quite often. And I love the synergy of the scientific method with spirituality, and I like, yeah, and we're talking about Richard Dawkins, and quite often you talk about like argument and sparring versus having a bit of a dance, and just like so often there is this dialogue of kind of radical Christianity versus radical atheism.
And I sorry for interrupting, but I just want to say I really want, a lot of the work I've been doing, especially with trying to articulate non-theism, is to try and get underneath that debate by saying, instead of one being right and wrong, what's the shared presuppositional framework and within which it's operating? And can we challenge, is it intellectually responsible and respectful fashion? Can we challenge that shared presuppositional framework? And I think we can. And non-theism says, right, the non-theism that is appropriate to things like Buddhism, some of the atheists are now co-opting the term non-theism in a way that I disagree with, right? Non-theism basically says this, that framing sacredness in terms of a God is to misframe it in a fundamental way. If what you mean by a God is some kind of being, some kind of consciousness, etc., and that, right, and related ideas that's associated with a kind of perfection. It's largely about us believing in it. There's a whole family network of often unexamined unexamined assumptions shared by both sides.
Yes.
And all that happens is one side says yes to them all, and the other side says no to them all.
Yeah.
And I want to reject that.
Yeah. And I, like when you say I had to bring my A game with Bernardo, and it's sort of like, it's so easy to shoot down some of those extreme unexamined assumptions as well.
Yeah.
John, I'm feeling that I should let you go.
Yeah.
And hey, look, it has been an absolute pleasure. I made a whole list of notes, which I don't normally do, of what I was going to ask you, and I didn't ask you about any of them, but I really loved the flow of our conversation. I got a lot from it personally, and it was a real pleasure to get to talk with you. Thank you.
It's a great pleasure talking to you, and I hope the fact that I'm sort of slightly in a text conversation wasn't rude. I wasn't trying. I really enjoyed this conversation. If you want to talk again and continue on, please invite me back. I'd be happy to talk again.
Wonderful. I will do that. Thanks very much. Have a great evening.
Great pleasure meeting you, and you have a great day. I take it it's morning for you, or
yeah.
afternoon?
It's 20 past 8 here. I'm going to go grab another coffee. Yeah.
Well, enjoy your coffee and enjoy your day. I meant what I said. If you want to talk again, happy to do so. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Awesome. Thank you. I definitely will.
Okay. Take good care.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Oh, I can. Yeah. All right. Sorry about that. I ended the meeting rather than left the meeting on my phone.
That's okay.
What I wanted to share with you was that I was a little bit nervous about meeting with you. I've been watching your lectures, and you've got this towering academic intellect, and I'm very scatty and disorganized with my thoughts, and I was a little bit nervous, and I think it's very funny that I've ended up this extremely scattered with you first thing.
Well, that's actually made it more personal, and I feel more connected to you. So this is excellent.
Excellent, cool, and for me too. But I also do you ever observe that that sometimes when you think a certain thing is going to be a certain way, in particular with a certain person, if you think they're going to be away, then they act that way, or if you think you're going to be perceived away, then you're more likely to act that way unconsciously?
Yeah, I mean, I think first impressions, it's been my extended experience that my first impressions are both powerful and frequently incorrect.
Yes.
So I've been trying very much to be much more open and take longer to form even an initial opinion of somebody. So very much so.
Cool. Yeah. Cool. So John, I might just jump in, I guess. I'll do my introduction. So hello, welcome to another episode of the Unfinished Cubby. Actually, John, do you know what? I'm going to do a double take on this. I'll tell you why, because I made some notes and I thought of the way that I wanted to introduce it today, and I'm going to read directly from that. All right. Take two.